2 years ago, Riley heard the words that would break her. "You're too small for the world I want." Today, in the heart of Manhattan, Shane stands tall, confident, successful, untouchable. But when he sees her again, something feels wrong. She's different, calm, unshaken. And beside her stands a man whose silent power fills every room he enters. What Shane doesn't know yet is that the woman he destroyed now holds his entire future in her hands. If this story already has you hooked, hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and comment where you're listening from. I love hearing from you. 2 years had carved themselves into Riley's memory like initials on old wood. Deep, permanent, impossible to sand away. She could still taste the bitterness of that evening, the clinking of champagne glasses around them, the soft piano melody threading through conversations, the golden light of the chandeliers in that upscale Manhattan restaurant making everything look warmer than it actually was. Shane had worn his charcoal suit that night, the one that made his shoulders look broader, more commanding. His phone had buzzed repeatedly on the white tablecloth between them. Emails, texts, notifications from his newly launched startup. Each vibration had pulled his attention further away from her until she'd felt like a ghost sitting across from him. "You're too small for the world I want to conquer, Riley." The words had landed like stones in still water, sending ripples that hadn't stopped yet. She remembered the way other diners had glanced over, curious, pitying. The waiter had approached with their dessert, then retreated when he'd sensed the tension. Riley had stood up slowly, her black dress suddenly feeling too tight, too obvious, too much. She'd walked out with her head high, her heels clicking against marble floors, but inside, she'd been crumbling. Now standing on Fifth Avenue with her canvas tote bag slung over her shoulder, Riley inhaled the crisp November air. The city smelled like roasted chestnuts from street vendors, expensive perfume from passing strangers, and the particular dampness that came before snow. Glass storefronts reflected her image back at her, jeans that fit perfectly, a cream cashmere sweater, leather ankle boots. Simple, comfortable, hers. She paused in front of a boutique window displaying diamond necklaces on black velvet. The reflection showed a woman she was still getting used to, stronger jawline from finally taking care of herself, eyes that didn't apologize for existing, lips that smiled when she actually meant it. Her phone vibrated. A text from Daniel. "Running late. Meet me at the office instead. Want to show you something." Riley's fingers moved across the screen naturally now. 2 years ago, she would have overthought every word. "See you in 20. Coffee?" His reply came instantly. "Already brewing your favorite." She smiled, a real one, the kind that reached her eyes. Daniel had this way of anticipating what she needed before she knew she needed it. It wasn't control, it was attention, the kind Shane had never given her. The subway entrance beckoned, its stairs descending into the rumbling underground. Riley merged with the crowd, her AirPods playing a Billie Eilish song, the lyrics about being someone's nobody hitting differently now. She wasn't anybody's nobody anymore. The memories didn't own her like they used to. They were background noise, uncomfortable but manageable. She'd learned that healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about the scar tissue growing strong enough that touching it didn't make you flinch. When she'd met Daniel 8 months ago at a charity gala for underprivileged youth, she hadn't been looking for anything. She'd been there representing the non-profit she'd started, a small organization helping women rebuild after divorce or heartbreak. He'd approached her near the silent auction, his navy suit understated but clearly expensive, his salt and pepper hair making him look distinguished rather than old. "You're Riley Morrison," he'd said, extending his hand. "I've been following your work. It's remarkable." She'd shaken his hand, prepared for the usual networking conversation, but his grip had been warm, steady, and his eyes, storm grey, attentive, had actually listened when she spoke. No phone checking, no wandering gaze, just presence. They'd talked for 2 hours that night, about purpose, about what happens when you lose yourself in someone else's dream, about the strange freedom that comes from starting over. He'd told her about building his company from nothing, about losing his first wife to cancer, about learning that success meant nothing if you had nobody to share it with. When he'd asked for her number, she'd hesitated. But something in his patient smile, in the way he'd waited without pressure, had made her type those 10 digits into his phone. Now, emerging from the subway at Midtown, Riley walked the 3 blocks to Whitmore Tower. The building stretched 40 stories high, its glass facade reflecting the afternoon sun like a mirror catching fire. The lobby smelled like expensive marble and fresh flowers, white orchids in massive vases, the kind that cost more than her old monthly rent. Security nodded at her. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Whitmore." The name still felt surreal. They'd gotten married quietly 6 months ago. Just them and a judge and 2 witnesses. No performance, no Instagram announcement. Just promises whispered in private and meant with everything. The elevator climbed smoothly to the penthouse level. Through the glass walls, Manhattan spread out below, a living, breathing organism of steel and ambition and broken dreams and second chances. The doors opened, and Daniel stood waiting, 2 coffee cups in his hands, his white shirt sleeves rolled up to his elbows. When he saw her, his entire expression softened in that way that still made her chest tight. "There she is," he said, handing her a cup. Their fingers brushed, and even that small contact carried electricity. Riley took a sip. Perfect temperature, perfect sweetness. "What did you want to show me?" Daniel's smile turned mysterious. "Patience. It's a surprise." She raised an eyebrow. "You know I hate surprises. You'll like this one." He gestured toward his office. "Come." As Riley followed him down the hallway lined with contemporary art, bold abstracts in primary colors, photographs of skylines at dusk, she noticed the way his hand naturally found the small of her back. Protective, grounding, real. His office was a study in minimalism, floor-to-ceiling windows, a sleek desk with dual monitors, leather chairs that probably cost more than most people's cars. But what caught her attention was the stack of architectural renderings spread across his conference table. "What's this?" she asked, setting down her coffee. Daniel moved beside her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something woodsy and clean. "Remember when you mentioned wanting to expand your non-profit? Create actual housing for women in transition?" Riley's heart stuttered. "Daniel, I bought the property on West 23rd, the old warehouse." He pointed to the renderings. 20 units, fully furnished, childcare on the first floor, job training center. Everything you described that night at dinner 3 months ago. She stared at the designs, her throat tight. "You remembered all that?" "I remember everything you say, Riley." His voice dropped lower, intimate. "Every word matters to me." She turned to face him, and the look in his eyes made something inside her chest crack open, not painfully, but like dawn breaking. This was what love actually looked like. Not grand gestures for show, but quiet attention to the dreams she'd whispered in the dark. "I don't know what to say," she managed. Daniel's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. "Say you'll run it. Say you'll let me be part of making your vision real." Riley leaned into his touch, feeling the weight of 2 years of healing crystallize into this single moment. She'd survived the breaking. She'd rebuilt herself piece by piece. And now she stood in a glass tower above Manhattan, loved by a man who saw her not as too small, but as exactly enough. "Yes," she whispered. But neither of them knew that downstairs, in the corporate offices below, Shane had just signed his employment contract, completely unaware that his new boss's wife was the woman whose heart he'd shattered. Shane adjusted his tie in the reflection of a Tiffany & Co. window, feeling the weight of success settling comfortably on his shoulders. The promotion had come through faster than he'd expected. Operations manager for one of Manhattan's most prestigious corporate groups. At 34, he was exactly where he'd planned to be, maybe even ahead of schedule. His navy Tom Ford suit fit perfectly, tailored last week in Soho. The leather briefcase in his hand was Italian, a gift to himself after signing the contract. His Apple Watch buzzed with congratulatory messages from colleagues, former classmates, people who suddenly remembered his name now that he had a title worth envying. "Looking sharp, Morrison," called Derek, one of his new team members, approaching with 2 others from the office. They'd suggested grabbing lunch at a new fusion place on Madison. Shane had agreed, enjoying the easy camaraderie of men who understood ambition. The November afternoon was crisp, the kind of weather that made New York feel like it belonged in a movie. Yellow cabs honked, tourists clustered around street performers, and the scent of halal cart food mixed with expensive perfume from passing businesswomen. That's when he saw her. At first, it was just a silhouette in his peripheral vision, a woman in a cream sweater and jeans, standing near a Dior storefront, looking at her phone. Something about the curve of her shoulders, the tilt of her head, made his chest tighten with uncomfortable recognition. Riley. She looked different. Not the nervous, eager-to-please woman he'd left sitting in that restaurant 2 years ago. Her hair was shorter now, cut to her shoulders in soft waves. She wore minimal makeup, but there was a glow to her skin that hadn't been there before. Confidence, maybe. Or just time. Shane's feet moved before his brain caught up. "Riley?" She looked up, and for a moment, just a flash, he saw something flicker across her face. Surprise, maybe, or was it recognition without emotion? Her expression smoothed into polite neutrality so quickly he couldn't be sure. Shane. Her voice was steady, unremarkable, like he was an old co-worker, not someone who'd once shared her bed and her future. Derek and the others had stopped beside him, sensing the shift in energy. Shane felt suddenly aware of them watching, of needing to maintain his image. Wow, it's been what? 2 years? He forced a casual smile, the kind he used in boardrooms. You look good. Different. Thank you. Riley slipped her phone into her tote bag, her movements unhurried. Congratulations on your promotion. I heard you landed at Whitmore Group. The fact that she knew caught him off guard. You keeping tabs on me? Something that might have been amusement touched her lips. New York's smaller than people think. Derek cleared his throat. We've got that reservation, man. But Shane couldn't quite walk away. Something about her calmness unsettled him. Where was the hurt? The lingering attachment? The proof that he'd mattered? So what are you up to these days, he asked, his tone carrying just enough condescension to remind her, and himself, of the hierarchy he'd established that night. Still doing that social work thing? Riley's eyes met his fully then, and he felt the impact like a physical thing. They were clearer than he remembered, less clouded by hope or fear or whatever had made her so easy to dismiss before. Something like that, she said. I run a non-profit now. We help women rebuild after difficult transitions. The pause before difficult transitions felt pointed, but her expression remained serene. That's nice, Shane said, and immediately hated how patronizing it sounded. Small stuff though, right? Community level? We do what matters. Riley adjusted her bag on her shoulder. The scale isn't what makes it significant. One of Shane's colleagues, Marcus, the finance guy, jumped in with enthusiasm. That's really cool. My sister went through a rough divorce last year. Could have used something like that. Riley smiled at Marcus, a genuine warmth that Shane realized she hadn't directed at him. Tell her to look up Morrison Foundation. We're expanding next year. Morrison Foundation? Shane repeated. You kept my name. Her laugh was soft, almost pitying. It's my name too, Shane. It was mine before I met you. The correction landed like a slap. He'd been so sure of his importance in her story that he'd forgotten she'd existed before him. Riley's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, and her entire demeanor shifted, softened, brightened. A small smile played at her lips as she typed a quick response. I should go, she said, looking back at Shane with that same unnerving calm. Good luck with the new position. Whitmore Group is special. You'll see. Something in the way she said special felt like she knew something he didn't. But before he could ask, she was walking away, her boots clicking confidently against the pavement, her posture straight and unbothered. Derek whistled low. Ex-girlfriend? Something like that, Shane muttered, watching her disappear into the crowd. But he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just lost a game he hadn't known they were playing. Riley wasn't supposed to be okay. She wasn't supposed to be glowing. And she definitely wasn't supposed to look at him like he was just anyone. Come on, man, Marcus said, clapping his shoulder. Food's getting cold. Shane followed them toward the restaurant, but his mind stayed on that interaction. On the way, Riley's eyes had held no anger, no longing, no anything, just a polite distance that felt worse than hatred. His phone buzzed. An email from HR. Welcome orientation. Monday 9 a.m. penthouse level. CEO D. Whitmore will be present. Shane smiled, pushing Riley from his thoughts. This was what mattered. Power. Position. Proximity to people who actually moved the world. He had no idea that Monday morning would shatter every assumption he'd just made. Monday morning arrived wrapped in grey clouds and the promise of rain. Shane stood in front of his bathroom mirror, knotting his burgundy silk tie with the precision of someone who understood that details mattered. His reflection looked back at him, sharp jaw, confident eyes, hair styled with just enough product to look effortless. Today was the day. The CEO meeting. The real beginning. D. Whitmore was a legend in Manhattan business circles, but somehow remained an enigma. Shane had done his research over the weekend, scrolling through LinkedIn, Forbes articles, business journals. The man had built his empire quietly, tech investments, real estate, green energy. But personal details, almost nothing. No social media presence, no trophy wife plastered across page 6. Just results and reputation. Shane's Uber wound through morning traffic, past coffee shops where people clutched their phones like lifelines, past construction sites where the city perpetually reinvented itself. His phone buzzed with a group chat from his team, jokes about impressing the big boss, speculation about what Whitmore was actually like. Marcus had written, "Heard he's super chill, but reads people like AI. Don't bullshit him." Derek added, "Also heard he's got this whole mysterious vibe, like Batman but with better PR." Shane smirked, typing back, "I don't need to impress him. My numbers speak for themselves. The confidence wasn't fake. He'd earned this. 3 years of 18-hour days, sacrificed weekends, relationships put on hold, including Riley, though he barely let himself think about that encounter on Friday. She'd been a distraction then. She'd be a footnote now." Whitmore Tower rose before him, all glass and steel catching the muted morning light. Shane stepped into the lobby, nodding at security who already knew his face. The elevator was empty, just him and his reflection in the polished bronze doors. As he rose toward the penthouse level, Shane rehearsed his introduction. Firm handshake, eye contact. Confidence without arrogance. He'd perfected this performance. The elevator chimed, 40th floor. The doors opened to reveal a reception area that looked like it belonged in an art museum. Marble floors, a floating staircase, abstract sculptures that probably cost more than Shane's car. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of Central Park, the trees beginning to shed their leaves in patches of gold and rust. "Mr. Morrison?" A woman in her 50s, elegantly dressed in a charcoal pantsuit, approached with a tablet. "I'm Helen, Mr. Whitmore's executive assistant. Welcome." "Thank you." Shane shook her hand, noting her assessing gaze. "The others are gathering in the conference room. Mr. Whitmore and Mrs. Whitmore will join us shortly." Shane followed her down a hallway lined with black and white photographs, cityscapes at dawn, architectural details, human faces caught in moments of unguarded emotion. Everything about this space whispered understated power. The conference room was stunning. A long table of dark wood, ergonomic leather chairs, one entire wall of windows overlooking the city. 6 other department heads were already seated, chatting quietly. Shane recognized a few faces from his first week. He took a seat midway down the table, accepting the coffee Helen offered. His heart rate was steady. He felt ready. Then Helen's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, smiled softly. "They're on their way up." The room fell quiet. Shane noticed the shift, everyone straightening slightly, conversations dying mid-sentence. This was the moment that mattered. First impressions with the man who controlled everything. The door opened. Daniel Whitmore entered first, and Shane immediately understood the Batman comparison. The man was probably in his late 40s, tall and lean in a perfectly cut grey suit, salt and pepper hair, strong features, eyes that seemed to take in everything without revealing anything. There was a stillness to him that commanded attention without demanding it. "Good morning," Daniel said, his voice resonant and calm. "Thank you all for being here." But Shane barely heard him, because walking in beside Daniel, Her hand resting lightly on a leather portfolio was Riley. Not Riley in jeans and a sweater, Riley in a tailored black dress that hit just below her knees, her hair pulled back in a low twist, subtle diamond earrings catching the light. She moved with the quiet grace of someone who belonged in rooms like this, who'd earned her place there. Shane's coffee cup stopped halfway to his lips. Riley's eyes swept the table, professional and detached, until they landed on him. For one infinite second, their gazes locked. He saw recognition there, but nothing else. No shock, no discomfort, which meant she'd known. She'd known Friday that he worked here, known that this moment was coming. "I'd like you all to meet my wife," Daniel said, his hand moving to rest gently on Riley's back, the gesture protective and proud. "Riley Whitmore, co-founder and director of our philanthropic division." The words hit Shane like physical blows. Wife, Whitmore, director. Riley smiled at the room, warm, genuine, nothing like the uncertain woman from 2 years ago. "It's wonderful to meet everyone. Well," her eyes flicked to Shane for a fraction of a second, "almost everyone." A few people chuckled, assuming it was a joke. Daniel pulled out a chair for Riley at the head of the table, beside his own seat. She sat with the ease of someone who'd done this 100 times. Shane's mind was spinning. The non-profit, Morrison Foundation. She'd kept talking Friday like they were separate things, but she'd married. When? How? This man, this titan who controlled Shane's entire career path? "Let's begin," Daniel said, opening a tablet. "We have several initiatives to discuss, including the new housing project Riley's been spearheading." As Daniel spoke about quarterly projections and strategic goals, Shane tried to focus, but his eyes kept drifting to Riley, to the way she took notes with a fountain pen, to the wedding band on her left hand, simple platinum, no ostentatious diamond, to the way Daniel's gaze softened imperceptibly whenever he glanced at her. At one point, Riley spoke up about the expansion timeline for the women's shelter. Her voice was confident, articulate, filled with the kind of passion Shane had once found endearing, but ultimately insufficient. "We'll need operational support for the job training programs," Riley said, looking directly at Shane. "I believe that falls under your department, Mr. Morrison." Mr. Morrison, like they were strangers. "Of course," Shane managed, his voice sounding strange in his own ears. "Happy to coordinate." Riley nodded once, then turned her attention back to Daniel, who was pulling up architectural renderings on the screen. The meeting continued for 90 minutes. Plans, budgets, timelines. Shane contributed when required, but he felt like he was underwater. Everything muffled and slow. When Daniel finally closed his tablet and stood, everyone else rose too. "Thank you all. Riley and I are available if anyone needs clarification on priorities. Helen has my calendar." People filed out, some stopping to introduce themselves properly to Riley. Shane hung back, unsure whether to approach or flee. But Riley solved the problem for him. As the room emptied, she gathered her portfolio and walked toward the door without a single glance in his direction. Daniel, however, paused beside Shane. Up close, the man was even more imposing, not through aggression, but through absolute certainty. "Shane, is it?" Daniel extended his hand. Shane shook it, feeling the firm grip. "Yes, sir." "Riley mentioned she knows you." Daniel's expression was pleasant, but his storm-grey eyes were reading Shane like code. "From before. We dated a while ago." Shane forced the words out. "I know." Daniel's smile didn't reach his eyes. "She told me everything, about how it ended, about what you said to her." Shane's throat went dry. "I'm glad she moved past it," Daniel continued, his tone conversational, but laced with steel. "She deserves better than living in someone else's small estimation of her worth, don't you think?" It wasn't a question that required an answer. Daniel clapped Shane's shoulder once, friendly on the surface, warning underneath, and walked out. Shane stood alone in the conference room, staring at the city sprawled below, and realized with crushing certainty that he'd just walked into a game where every rule had already been written, and he was on the losing side. The rest of Monday passed in a fog of humiliation Shane couldn't quite name. He sat through departmental briefings, nodded at appropriate moments, responded to emails with his usual efficiency. But underneath, his mind kept replaying that conference room, the way Riley had looked at him like he was just another employee. The pressure of Daniel Whitmore's handshake, the quiet devastation of realizing he'd become irrelevant in her story. By Wednesday, Shane had convinced himself he could compartmentalize. This was business. Riley was his boss's wife, nothing more. Ancient history didn't have to bleed into professional reality. Then Helen called his extension at 2 p.m. "Mr. Morrison? Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore would like to see you in the executive suite. Are you available now?" Shane's stomach dropped. "Of course. I'll be right up." He grabbed his tablet, straightened his tie, and took the elevator to the penthouse level. His reflection in the bronze doors looked composed, but his pulse hammered against his collar. Helen led him past her desk to a different room than Monday's conference space. This one was smaller, more intimate, what people probably called a working office. One wall was entirely glass, offering an unobstructed view of Central Park. The autumn trees looked like watercolor paintings from this height, gold and amber against grey sky. Daniel sat on a modern grey sofa, tablet in hand, looking relaxed in his shirt sleeves. Riley stood by the window, her silhouette backlit by the afternoon sun. She'd changed from her morning dress into black slacks and a silk ivory blouse, her hair down now around her shoulders. She was holding a coffee cup, steam rising, and for a disorienting second, Shane remembered how she used to make his coffee in the mornings, always too weak, always with too much sugar because she'd never learned how he actually liked it. "Shane, thank you for coming up." Daniel stood, gesturing to a chair across from the sofa. "Please sit." Riley turned from the window, her expression neutral but alert. She moved to sit beside Daniel, not quite touching him but close enough that the connection was obvious. Her wedding ring caught the light. Shane sat, placing his tablet on his lap like a shield. "How can I help?" Daniel leaned back, crossing one ankle over his knee in a posture that somehow managed to look both casual and commanding. "We wanted to discuss the operational structure for Riley's housing initiative. You'll be working closely with her team over the next 6 months. I'm looking forward to it," Shane said automatically, though his eyes betrayed him by flicking to Riley. She met his gaze steadily. "The job training component requires coordination with your department's vendor relationships. We need partnerships with local businesses willing to hire women in transition, many with gaps in their employment history." Her voice was professional, but Shane heard the subtext. Women like she'd been. Women he would have dismissed as too small for anything that mattered. "I can put together a proposal," Shane offered. "Timeline?" "End of week," Riley said. "I need to present to the board on Monday." "That's tight." "I'm aware." She tilted her head slightly, a gesture he remembered, the way she used to look at him when he'd promised to make time for her and then cancelled. "Can you deliver, or should I assign it to someone else?" The challenge was subtle but unmistakable. "I'll deliver," Shane said, feeling heat creep up his neck. Daniel's fingers rested on the sofa back, close to Riley's shoulder, not possessive, just there, connected. "Good. Riley's worked hard on this project. It deserves our full support." "The women we're serving deserve it," Riley corrected gently, her eyes softening as she looked at her husband. "I'm just the facilitator." The way Daniel smiled at her, private, warm, full of pride, made Shane's chest tighten with something he refused to name as jealousy. "You're more than that," Daniel said quietly, and his hand moved to briefly touch her shoulder blade. The gesture was so natural it clearly wasn't for show. Shane looked away, suddenly feeling like an intruder. Riley cleared her throat, returning to business. "I'll send you the detailed specs this afternoon. We should schedule a working session, probably Thursday morning. Does 9 work for you?" "I'll make it work." "Here or in the project office downtown?" Daniel asked Riley. She considered. "Downtown. Shane should see the actual space we're renovating. Context helps." Shane nodded, making notes on his tablet to avoid looking at either of them. But he felt the weight of the room, the silent understanding between Riley and Daniel, the history hanging in the air like smoke, the shift in power dynamics that left him completely exposed. Daniel stood, signaling the meeting's end. Shane rose quickly. "One more thing," Daniel said, his tone still pleasant but his eyes sharp. Riley mentioned you have strong opinions about what constitutes meaningful work, about scale and impact. Shane froze. She'd told him. About the restaurant, about his words. I've learned, Daniel continued, stepping closer, that the size of something has nothing to do with its significance. A single life changed matters as much as 1,000. Maybe more. He paused. Do you agree? It was a test. They both knew it. Yes, Shane said, his voice rougher than he intended. I agree. Daniel nodded slowly, as if deciding whether to believe him. Then he extended his hand. Good. We'll see you Thursday. The handshake was brief, firm, definitive. Riley stood too, gathering her tablet and coffee cup. As Shane turned to leave, she spoke. Shane. He stopped, looking back. Her expression was unreadable, not cold, not warm, just clear. Thank you for being flexible on the timeline. This project matters to a lot of people who don't have the luxury of waiting. The words were polite, professional, but they carved into him like a scalpel, precise and deep. Of course, he managed. He walked out, past Helen's knowing smile, into the elevator where his reflection looked exactly the same as when he'd arrived. But something fundamental had shifted. For 2 years, Shane had operated on the assumption that leaving Riley had been the right choice. That ambition justified collateral damage, that she'd been a detour he'd wisely abandoned. Now, standing in a glass tower watching the city blur past, he realized he'd been wrong about nearly everything. Riley hadn't been too small. He had. And the man who'd recognized her actual size, who'd given her the platform she deserved, who looked at her like she hung the moon, that man now controlled every aspect of Shane's professional future. The elevator doors opened on his floor. Shane stepped out into the bustling office, surrounded by colleagues who saw him as successful, ambitious, ascending. None of them knew he was actually falling. Thursday morning broke cold and sharp, the kind of November day that promised winter wasn't far behind. Shane arrived at the downtown project site at 8:45 a.m., 15 minutes early, a calculated move to demonstrate commitment. The building was a former textile warehouse in Chelsea, its brick facade weathered but solid, scaffolding climbing its sides like metal ivy. A temporary construction trailer sat in the lot, warm light glowing from its windows. Shane knocked, and a woman in her 30s opened the door, jeans, work boots, clipboard in hand. You must be Shane Morrison. I'm Andrea, project manager. Riley's running a few minutes late. Conference call with contractors ran over. Coffee? She gestured to a pot brewing on a small table. Thanks. Shane poured himself a cup, black, and studied the blueprints pinned to the trailer walls. 20 residential units, communal kitchen, childcare center, computer lab. Every detail seemed designed around actual human needs rather than aesthetic appeal. A car door slammed outside. Through the trailer window, Shane saw a black Tesla pull up. Daniel emerged from the driver's side, walking around to open the passenger door. Riley stepped out, wrapped in a camel-colored wool coat, leather messenger bag over her shoulder. Daniel said something that made her laugh. A real laugh. Her head tilting back, completely unguarded. He kissed her forehead before she walked toward the trailer. Not a performance, just affection. Shane looked away, suddenly fascinated by the blueprints. Riley entered in a gust of cold air and the scent of vanilla perfume. Sorry I'm late. The HVAC contractor has opinions about everything. She unwound a burgundy scarf from her neck, shaking out her hair. Andrea, did the permits come through? Signed and posted as of yesterday. Perfect. Riley finally looked at Shane, her expression professional. Ready for the tour? Absolutely. They exited the trailer, Andrea staying behind to handle phone calls. The morning air bit at Shane's face as they crossed the lot toward the building's entrance. Construction workers called greetings to Riley. She knew them by name, asked about someone's daughter's soccer game, another's wife's recovery from surgery. She wasn't performing compassion. She was living it. Inside, the space smelled like sawdust and fresh paint. Exposed brick walls had been sandblasted clean. New windows let in streams of pale sunlight. The floors were being refinished, old oak restored to honey gold warmth. Ground floor will be communal spaces, Riley explained. her voice echoing slightly in the empty room. Kitchen here, dining area, children's play space in that corner. We want it to feel like home, not an institution. Shane took notes on his tablet. The job training component, where does that fit? Second floor, computer lab, interview prep space, workshop area for skills training. Riley walked toward the staircase, testing its sturdiness before climbing. Shane followed. Upstairs, the layout was coming together. Individual units with small kitchenettes, bathrooms being tiled, closet space maximized. Riley paused in one doorway, her fingers trailing along the fresh drywall. Each woman who comes here will have been through something that broke her, she said quietly, almost to herself. Divorce, abuse, economic collapse. They'll arrive feeling exactly like I did 2 years ago, like they're too small to matter. Shane's chest tightened. Riley. She turned, and for the first time since Monday, her professional mask slipped slightly. Not into anger or pain, but into something more complicated. Acknowledgement of shared history without being defined by it. I'm not telling you this to make you uncomfortable, she continued. I'm telling you because you need to understand what we're actually building here. These partnerships you're arranging, they're not just vendor contracts, they're lifelines. I understand. Do you? Riley stepped closer, her eyes searching his face. Because the man I knew 2 years ago measured success by salary and status, by how high you could climb and who you could leave behind. Shane wanted to defend himself, but the words died in his throat. She wasn't wrong. People change, he finally said. I know. I did. Riley's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, a text from Daniel with a photo of 2 coffee cups and a heart emoji. Her expression softened instantly, a small smile playing at her lips as she typed back. The casual intimacy of it, the evidence of a relationship built on small, consistent moments, felt like watching something he'd never quite understood how to create. Riley pocketed her phone. Your vendor list needs to include businesses willing to take risks on women with complicated histories. That means building actual relationships, not just sending form emails. I can do that? I hope so, because every decision you make now, she paused, choosing words carefully, goes through me for approval. The housing project, the training programs, even the hiring for your own team. Daniel structured it that way deliberately. The words landed like stones. Shane understood immediately. This wasn't just about the project. This was about accountability, about ensuring he couldn't bulldoze over people anymore without consequences. He's protecting you, Shane said. He's protecting the mission, Riley corrected. But yes, he's also protecting me. That's what partnership looks like. They stood in the unfinished room, autumn light slanting through bare windows, the sounds of construction echoing from below. Shane felt the full weight of his past choices pressing down, not because Riley was punishing him, but because she'd moved so far beyond him that punishment wasn't even necessary. I'm sorry, he said suddenly, for what I said that night, for making you feel like you weren't enough. Riley studied him for a long moment. Thank you, but you should know, I don't need that apology anymore. I needed it 2 years ago, when I was still trying to figure out if you'd been right about me. She adjusted her bag on her shoulder. Now I know you weren't, and that knowledge didn't come from you. It came from doing the work to rebuild myself. Her phone rang, Daniel's name on the screen. She answered, her voice warming immediately. Hey. Yeah, we're almost done. Lunch sounds perfect. Love you too. She hung up, and Shane saw the gold band on her finger catch the light again. Simple. Solid. Real. Send me your preliminary vendor list by tomorrow afternoon, Riley said, back to business. We'll review it together next week. Will Daniel be there? Riley smiled, not unkindly but with complete clarity. He's there for every important decision I make. That's what it means to have a real partner. She walked toward the stairs, leaving Shane standing in the empty room that would soon house women rebuilding their lives. Women who'd been told they were too small, too damaged, too much of a risk. Women like Riley had been. Women like Riley no longer was. Shane looked out the window at the city spreading beyond. Millions of people, millions of stories, millions of chances to choose differently. His reflection in the glass looked back at him, and for the first time in years he didn't recognize the man he'd become. The question was whether it was too late to become someone else. Friday afternoon, Shane received an email from Helen. "Mr. Whitmore requests your presence. 4 p.m. today. His private office. No context, no agenda, just a summons." Shane spent the intervening hours oscillating between anxiety and forced calm. He reviewed his vendor proposals 3 times, checked his reports for errors, rehearsed explanations for decisions that might be questioned. But underneath the preparation, a deeper unease hummed. This wasn't about spreadsheets. At 3:55 p.m., he rode the elevator to the penthouse level. His reflection in the polished doors showed a man in a sharp suit, but Shane felt exposed, like his skin had been peeled back to reveal everything he'd tried to hide. Helen smiled professionally. "Go right in. He's expecting you." Shane knocked twice, then entered. Daniel's private office was different from the conference spaces, more personal, less performative. Books lined one wall: philosophy, history, biographies of people who'd built empires and lost everything. A vintage record player sat in one corner, Miles Davis album cover propped beside it. The desk was minimalist, just a laptop and a single framed photograph Shane couldn't see from this angle. Daniel stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, hands in his pockets, watching the city transition from afternoon to evening. He didn't turn immediately. "Shane, thank you for coming." His voice was calm, almost meditative. "Sit, please." Shane chose one of the 2 leather chairs facing the window. Daniel finally turned, his expression unreadable, and sat across from him. The light behind Daniel put his face partially in shadow, making him harder to read. "How was the site visit?" Daniel asked. "Productive. Riley's vision is impressive. She has a gift for seeing what others overlook." Daniel leaned back, crossing one leg. "Tell me something. When you look at that project, the housing, the training programs, what do you actually see?" The question felt loaded. Shane chose his words carefully. "I see opportunity, infrastructure that creates pathways for people who've been sidelined." Good answer. Daniel's slight smile suggested it was the expected answer, not necessarily the true one. "But what do you feel when you see it?" Shane hesitated. Feelings weren't currency in business. Feelings were what got you dismissed as soft. "I feel—" He stopped, recalibrated. "Uncomfortable, honestly." Daniel's eyebrows lifted slightly. "Why?" "Because it forces me to look at things I've ignored. People I've—" Shane's throat tightened. "People I've dismissed." "Like Riley?" It wasn't a question. "Yes." Daniel was quiet for a moment, just watching Shane with those storm-grey eyes that seemed to catalogue everything. Then he stood, walked to his desk, and picked up the framed photograph. He handed it to Shane. It was Riley, laughing at something off-camera, sunlight in her hair, wearing a simple white dress. But what struck Shane was her expression, completely unguarded, radiant, alive in a way he'd never seen when she was his. "That was taken 3 months after we got married," Daniel said softly. "We were in Montauk for the weekend. No agenda, no schedule, just time." He took the photo back, studying it with something tender in his expression. "You know what she told me that weekend? She said she'd forgotten what it felt like to take up space without apologizing for it." The words hit Shane like a fist. Daniel set the photo down carefully, then turned to face Shane fully. "I'm going to ask you something, and I want honesty, not performance, not what you think I want to hear. Actual truth." Shane nodded, his mouth dry. "Do you still have feelings for her?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Shane's first instinct was to deny it, to protect himself, to maintain professional boundaries. But Daniel's gaze was patient, implacable, waiting. "I don't know," Shane admitted finally. "I think what I feel is regret. Not for losing her exactly, but for—" he struggled to articulate it. "For not seeing who she actually was, for measuring her worth by my ambitions instead of her own." Daniel nodded slowly. "That's honest. I appreciate that." He sat on the edge of his desk, less formal now. "Let me tell you what I see when I look at you, Shane. I see someone talented, driven, capable of significant impact. I also see someone who's built their entire identity on climbing ladders, never stopping to ask if the ladder's leaning against the right wall. Shane felt the truth of it like a blade between his ribs. You've succeeded by conventional metrics, Daniel continued. Money, title, recognition. But here's what I've learned. Those things are empty if they're built on treating people as disposable. Success that requires you to diminish others isn't success. It's just expensive loneliness. Is that why you gave me this position? Shane asked. To teach me a lesson? No, I gave you this position because your resume is impressive and the company needs your skills. Daniel's expression hardened slightly. But I'm also watching. Every decision you make, every interaction, every moment where you have to choose between ego and integrity, I'm watching. Because of Riley. Because of character. Daniel stood, moving back to the window. The city lights were beginning to flicker on below, Manhattan transforming into its evening self. Riley told me everything about your relationship, the dismissiveness, the way you made her feel small, that final conversation in the restaurant. She was devastated for months. Shane closed his eyes briefly. I know. But here's the thing. She's not telling me this to punish you. She's telling me because she's worked hard to understand what happened, to process the pain, to become someone who won't accept that treatment again. Daniel's voice softened. And I'm grateful for it. Because whatever broke in her that night allowed me to find her. The generosity of that statement, acknowledging Shane's cruelty as somehow part of the path that led Riley to Daniel, felt both devastating and strangely compassionate. What do you want from me? Shane asked. Daniel turned, his silhouette dark against the glowing city. I want you to decide who you actually want to be, not who you think you should be to impress people, not who your ambition tells you to become, but who you are when nobody's keeping score. He walked back to Shane, extending his hand. Shane stood, shaking it. You'll be working closely with Riley for the next 6 months, Daniel said. That's non-negotiable. It will be uncomfortable. You'll be forced to confront your choices repeatedly. But if you approach it with humility, real humility, not performance, you might learn something valuable. And if I can't? Daniel's smile was slight, but his meaning was clear. Then you'll discover that talent without character has a ceiling. And that ceiling is lower than you think. He released Shane's hand. That's all. Have a good weekend. Shane walked to the door, then paused. Does Riley know we're having this conversation? She knows I wanted to speak with you. She trusts me to handle it appropriately. Daniel's expression softened. That's what partnership looks like, Shane. Trust without control. Support without possession. She doesn't need me to fight her battles, but she knows I will if necessary. Shane nodded, his throat tight and left. The elevator ride down felt longer than usual. When the doors opened on his floor, Shane stood there for a moment, not moving, while people brushed past him, rushing toward their weekend plans. He thought about Riley laughing in that photograph, about Daniel's quiet certainty, about the housing project and the women who'd arrived there carrying their broken pieces, hoping to be rebuilt, about the man he'd been and the man he might still become. The doors started to close. Shane stepped out, letting them shut behind him. The question Daniel had asked echoed in his mind. Who are you when nobody's keeping score? For the first time in years, Shane didn't have an answer he liked. The Foundation's annual benefit wasn't just a fundraiser. It was Manhattan's social event of the season. Shane had received his invitation 3 weeks ago, formal calligraphy on cream cardstock. The Whitmore Foundation requests your presence. Black tie, the Plaza Hotel, $1,000 per plate. He'd considered declining. The thought of spending an entire evening watching Riley and Daniel move through their world with effortless grace felt like choosing emotional torture. But refusing would have been conspicuous, possibly career-limiting. So Saturday evening found Shane adjusting his bow tie in his apartment mirror, rehearsing the art of polite distance. The plaza's grand ballroom glittered like something from another era, crystal chandeliers throwing prismatic light across marble floors, round tables draped in champagne silk, centerpieces of white roses and gold-dusted branches. A jazz quartet played in one corner, their melody weaving through conversations and laughter. Shane accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and scanned the room. Corporate titans, politicians, celebrities who championed fashionable causes. Everyone who mattered gathered to celebrate Riley's work. Then he saw her. Riley stood near the entrance greeting guests, and Shane's breath caught. She wore a floor-length gown in deep emerald green, the fabric hugging her frame before flowing into an elegant skirt. Her shoulders were bare, except for delicate straps, her hair swept up to expose the curve of her neck. Diamond earrings, simple, understated, caught the light when she moved. But it wasn't the dress or the jewels that made her stunning. It was the confidence, the way she embraced people with genuine warmth, the way her laugh rang out unforced, the way she inhabited her body like she'd finally made peace with taking up space in the world. Daniel stood beside her in a classic black tuxedo, his hand resting lightly on her lower back. They moved as a unit. When she turned to introduce someone, he was already there. When she needed her champagne refilled, he'd already signaled a waiter. Shane drifted toward his assigned table, recognizing a few faces from work. Marcus was there with his wife, Derek, with a date who looked bored already. They made small talk about the venue, the food, the obvious opulence. "Riley really put this together?" Derek's date asked, unimpressed. "I thought these things were just about rich people patting themselves on the back." "The foundation funded housing for 200 women last year," Marcus said quietly. "My sister was one of them. This isn't performance, it's actual impact." The woman had the grace to look embarrassed. Dinner was exquisite, courses that arrived like art, wine that probably cost more than Shane's monthly rent. Between the entree and dessert, Riley took the small stage, Daniel standing just off stage watching her. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Riley began, her voice clear and strong through the microphone. 2 years ago, I was sitting in a different kind of room, hearing words that convinced me I was too small to matter, too insignificant to deserve a seat at tables like this. Shane's hand tightened around his wine glass. "I believed those words for a while," Riley continued. "I let them define my worth, limit my vision, shrink my world. But then something shifted. Not because someone rescued me, but because I decided to rescue myself." She paused, her eyes sweeping the room. They landed on Shane for just a heartbeat, then moved on. "The women we serve have heard similar messages, that they're too broken, too difficult, too risky, that their trauma makes them unemployable, that their past defines their future." Riley's voice strengthened. "We exist to prove those messages are lies. Every woman who walks through our doors learns what I learned, that your worth isn't determined by someone else's limited imagination." The room erupted in applause. Daniel stepped onto the stage, kissing Riley's temple before taking the microphone. "My wife is brilliant, compassionate, and far too modest," he said, drawing warm laughter. "This organization exists because she refused to let her pain become pointless. She transformed it into purpose." His gaze found hers, and the intimacy of that look in front of hundreds of people was almost uncomfortable to witness. "I'm constantly in awe of her." More applause. Riley's eyes glistened, but she was smiling. After the speeches, people mingled. Shane stayed at his table, nursing his wine, watching Riley work the room. She was magnetic, pulling people into conversation, making everyone feel seen. Daniel remained nearby, not hovering but present, occasionally touching her elbow or bringing her water when she'd been talking too long. "You should just go talk to her," Marcus said, sliding into the seat beside Shane. "What?" "Riley. You've been staring at her all night. Do either talk to her or stop torturing yourself." Shane shook his head. "There's nothing to say." "Bullshit." Marcus leaned back, studying him. "You're not over her. Maybe you never were. She's married, happily. Yeah, I can see that. But that doesn't change what you're feeling." Marcus's expression softened. "Look, I don't know what happened between you two, but my sister told me what Riley's organization did for her. They didn't just give her a place to stay. They gave her back herself. Whatever Riley went through to build that kind of empathy, it changed her, made her powerful." "I know." "Do you?" "Because the way you're watching her doesn't look like admiration. It looks like regret." Before Shane could respond, someone approached their table. A woman in her 40s, elegant in navy blue with kind eyes. "Excuse me, are you Shane Morrison?" Shane stood. "Yes." "I'm Catherine Reynolds. I run the job placement program at the foundation. She extended her hand. Riley mentioned you're coordinating vendor partnerships for the housing project? That's right. I'd love to discuss potential employers. Would you have 15 minutes? Shane glanced at Marcus, who shrugged. Sure, of course. Catherine led him to a quieter corner where several foundation staff had gathered. For the next 20 minutes, Shane found himself in the most meaningful work conversation he'd had in years. These people weren't focused on profit margins or market share. They were focused on actual human transformation. We need employers who understand that a gap in work history doesn't equal lack of ability, Catherine explained. Women who've been out of the workforce while escaping abuse, or recovering from trauma, or simply surviving, they bring resilience that most employees never develop. Shane took notes on his phone, genuinely engaged. What industries are most receptive? Surprisingly, tech startups. They care less about traditional credentials. Also hospitality, healthcare support roles, creative fields. As they talked, Shane became aware of someone approaching. He looked up to find Riley standing there, Daniel a step behind her. Catherine, thank you for cornering him, Riley said warmly. Shane's vendor list was impressive, but I wanted you two to connect directly. He's been wonderful, Catherine assured her. Actually listening, not just checking boxes. Riley's eyes met Shane's, assessing, curious. Can I borrow him for a moment? Catherine nodded, melting back into the crowd. Daniel touched Riley's elbow gently. I'll get us some air, he said quietly, then disappeared toward the terrace. Suddenly it was just Shane and Riley standing in a corner of the ballroom while the party swirled around them. Your speech was powerful, Shane said. Thank you. Riley's guard was up, but not impenetrable. I meant every word. I know, that's what made it powerful. She studied him for a long moment. The jazz quartet shifted into something slower, more melancholic. Couples drifted toward the dance floor. Why are you really here tonight, Shane? Riley asked quietly. You could have sent a donation and skipped the event. I wanted to see what you've built. And? It's extraordinary. You're extraordinary. The words came out raw, unplanned. I was wrong, Riley. About everything. About you. About what matters. About... Stop. Riley's voice was gentle but firm. I appreciate the apology, truly. But I don't need you to validate me anymore. I don't need you to see my worth for it to exist. Shane nodded, his throat tight. I know, but I needed to say it anyway. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of their history settling between them like snow. Do you love him? Shane asked suddenly. Daniel. Riley's expression softened completely. More than I knew was possible. Does he know? About us? About tonight? He knows everything. I don't keep secrets from him. Riley glanced toward the terrace where Daniel waited. He trusts me to handle this however I need to. That's not jealousy. That's confidence. Yes. Riley's smile was small but real. That's the difference. Shane understood then. Finally. Fully. What he'd had with Riley had been possession disguised as love, control masked as partnership. What she had with Daniel was something else entirely, something he'd never learned how to build. I should go, Shane said. Let you get back to your night. But as he turned, Riley touched his arm, brief, barely there. Shane, for what it's worth. I hope you find what you're looking for. I hope you figure out who you want to be. Her words echoed Daniel's from yesterday, and maybe that was the point. Shane watched her walk back to the terrace, to the man who stood waiting with 2 glasses of champagne, and a smile meant only for her. Daniel wrapped his arm around Riley's waist, pulling her close, and they stood together, looking out at the Manhattan skyline. Shane left the ballroom, the sound of music and laughter fading behind him. The November night was cold, sharp, clarifying, and for the first time, Shane wondered if maybe, just maybe, he could learn to be someone different. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisis that revealed character. Shane was at his desk reviewing quarterly projections when his phone erupted. Calls, texts, an emergency Slack message from Derek. Vendor contract issue. Major. Conference room. Now. By the time Shane reached the glass-walled conference room, 6 people were already gathered, faces tense. Marcus pulled up a spreadsheet on the screen, columns of numbers highlighted in angry red. "What happened?" Shane asked, setting down his coffee. "The Riverside contract," Marcus explained. "Remember, we fast-tracked them for the job training partnerships. Their accounting team just flagged discrepancies. They've been overcharging the foundation by 30% for 3 months. Shane's stomach dropped. He'd signed off on those invoices. He'd vouched for Riverside's CEO, an old college connection who'd promised preferential rates in exchange for the high-profile partnership. "How much are we talking?" Shane asked, though he already dreaded the answer. $87,000, and the foundation board meets tomorrow to review Q4 expenditures. The room went quiet. Everyone knew what this meant. The housing project budget was already tight. $87,000 wasn't catastrophic to the company, but it was 3 months of operating costs for Riley's program. Worse, it was Shane's responsibility, his vendor, his approval, his signature. "We could bury it in general operating expenses," Derek suggested quietly. "Spread it across departments, no one would notice." Shane's first instinct was to agree. It would protect him, maintain his reputation, avoid the humiliation of admitting he'd failed to catch the overcharges. He'd built his career on appearing infallible. But then he thought about Riley's speech Saturday night, about women who'd been told they were too broken to deserve second chances, about the fact that his mistake would directly impact their lives. "No," Shane said firmly. "We disclose it. Today." Derek blinked. "Are you serious? This could—" "I know what it could do." Shane met each person's eyes around the table. "But hiding it would be worse. Schedule an emergency meeting with Riley and Daniel. I'll take full responsibility." Marcus nodded slowly, respect flickering across his face. "I'll set it up." An hour later, Shane sat in the same executive suite where Daniel had questioned his character just days ago. The irony wasn't lost on him. Riley arrived first, her expression neutral but alert. She wore a grey pantsuit, her hair pulled back, every inch the professional director. She sat across from Shane, tablet ready, waiting. Daniel entered moments later, closing the door behind him. He remained standing, arms crossed, his presence filling the room like pressure before a storm. "What's the situation?" he asked, no preamble. Shane didn't soften it. "I made a mistake. The Riverside partnership I recommended has been systematically overcharging the foundation. $87,000 over 3 months. I signed off on every invoice without proper verification." Riley's jaw tightened. "$87,000? "Yes." "That's nearly our entire 4th quarter training budget," she said, her voice controlled but sharp with frustration. "Do you understand what that means? Women who were promised job placement will have to wait. Programs we've already committed to will be delayed." "I understand." Shane's throat felt tight. "And I take full responsibility." Daniel moved to the window, his back to them, silent. The quiet was worse than anger. "Why Riverside?" Riley asked. "What was your vetting process?" Shane could have lied. Could have blamed incomplete documentation, rushed timelines, insufficient oversight from other departments. Instead, he chose truth. "The CEO is someone I went to school with. He promised excellent rates and quick turnaround. I trusted the relationship instead of verifying the numbers." Shane forced himself to maintain eye contact with Riley. "I prioritized convenience over diligence, and your program is paying the price." Riley was quiet for a long moment, her fingers drumming against her tablet. When she spoke, her voice carried disappointment that cut deeper than rage. "You know what's most frustrating? It's not just the money. It's that you made the same mistake with me that you made with this contract." Shane frowned. "What do you mean?" "You made assumptions based on surface-level assessments. With Riverside, you saw a familiar face and stopped asking questions. With me, you saw someone who didn't fit your narrow definition of ambition and dismissed everything else." Riley leaned forward. "Due diligence isn't just about numbers, Shane. It's about actually seeing what's in front of you." The words landed like a diagnosis, precise, undeniable, exposing the pattern he'd been repeating for years. Daniel finally turned from the window. "What's your recommendation for next steps?" Shane had prepared for this. Terminate the Riverside contract immediately. I'll personally audit every vendor relationship I've approved to ensure there are no other issues. The overage should come from my department's discretionary budget, not the foundation's allocation. That's not how organizational accounting works, Daniel said. I know, but I'll find a way to make it right. Cut my own performance bonus if necessary. Whatever it takes to ensure Riley's programs aren't impacted. Riley's expression shifted, not to forgiveness, but to something more complex. Recognition, maybe, of effort if not redemption. The board meeting is tomorrow, she said. I have to disclose this. They'll want explanations, accountability measures, assurance it won't happen again. I'll present it myself, Shane offered. I'll stand in front of them and own it completely. Daniel and Riley exchanged a look, one of those wordless conversations couples develop. She gave a slight nod. He returned it. All right, Daniel said finally. You'll present at tomorrow's board meeting. But understand, you get one chance to do this right. One. If you deflect, minimize, or attempt to spin this as anything other than your failure, you're done here. I understand. Do you? Daniel stepped closer, his grey eyes intense. Because this isn't just about career consequences. This is about whether you can actually change or if Friday's conversation was just performance. Shane stood, meeting Daniel's gaze directly. I'm tired of performing. I'm tired of protecting an image of success that's built on cutting corners and dismissing what doesn't serve me. I made a mistake, a significant one, and I want to fix it, not because it's strategic, but because it's right. The room held its breath. Riley stood too, gathering her tablet. We'll see you tomorrow at 9. Come prepared with a full forensic review of all your vendor contracts and a remediation plan. I will. As they moved toward the door, Shane spoke again. Riley, she paused, looking back. I know I've said this before, but I need to say it again. I'm sorry. Not just for this contract. For all of it. For making you feel like you had to shrink yourself to fit into my world. For measuring your worth by my ambitions. For not seeing you. Riley's expression softened slightly. Not forgiveness, but acknowledgement. Thank you. That means something. But Shane, the apology isn't what matters most. It's what you do from here. She left with Daniel, their footsteps fading down the hallway. Shane stood alone in the executive suite, the city stretching below him through floor-to-ceiling windows. Manhattan at midday, millions of people making millions of choices, some expanding their humanity, others contracting it. For years, Shane had chosen self-protection over integrity, image over truth, ambition over connection. But standing in this glass room, knowing he'd face a board tomorrow and admit failure publicly, Shane felt something unexpected. Not shame, though that was there too. Relief. Because for the first time in his adult life, he was choosing to be honest rather than impressive, vulnerable rather than invincible. He didn't know if it would save his job, didn't know if Riley would ever truly forgive him, didn't know if he could actually become the person Daniel had challenged him to be. But he knew he was finally willing to try. And in the quiet of that realization, something that had been clenched tight in Shane's chest for years began, slowly, to uncurl. The morning light crept through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Daniel and Riley's penthouse bedroom, like a promise being kept slowly. Riley stirred first, consciousness arriving gently, rather than jarring her awake. The sheets were Egyptian cotton, impossibly soft. But what made her linger in bed wasn't the luxury. It was the warmth of Daniel's arm draped across her waist, his chest rising and falling against her back. She'd learned to recognize the different qualities of morning. There were anxious mornings when she woke with her mind already racing through task lists and obligations. There were restless mornings when old memories surfaced uninvited, requiring deliberate breathing to settle. But this morning felt different. Settled. Like something that had been askew for a long time had finally clicked into place. Daniel's fingers moved slightly against her ribs, a sleepy caress that asked, "Are you awake?" Without words, Riley turned in his arms, finding his grey eyes already open, soft with the particular tenderness that came before the day demanded their professional selves. "Morning," she whispered, though no one was there to overhear. "Morning, beautiful." His voice was rough with sleep, his hair charmingly disheveled. He traced her jawline with his thumb, the gesture so familiar now it felt like breathing. "How'd you sleep?" "Better than I expected. You?" "Always better when you're here." He smiled. Then his expression turned more serious. "Today's the board meeting. How are you feeling about Shane's presentation?" Riley considered the question. Yesterday's revelation about the Riverside contract could have sent her spiraling, could have confirmed every fear that trusting someone with her work was dangerous, that men like Shane would always prioritize themselves over the mission. But Shane had surprised her, not by being perfect, but by choosing accountability over self-protection. "I think he might actually mean it this time," Riley said carefully. "The apology, the willingness to change." Daniel pulled her closer, his lips brushing her forehead. "And if he doesn't? If this is just another performance? Then we'll handle it. Together." Riley looked up at him, her hand resting over his heart. "But I'm not afraid of him anymore, Daniel. He doesn't have power over me. Not my past, not my present, not my sense of worth." "You never needed me to rescue you from him," Daniel said softly. "You know that, right? You'd already rescued yourself before we met." Riley's eyes stung with sudden emotion. "I know, but having you beside me made everything stronger, made me stronger." He kissed her then, slow, deep, unhurried. The kind of kiss that said, "We have time, we have this, we have us." When they pulled apart, Riley rested her forehead against his, breathing him in. "Coffee?" Daniel asked, his lips quirking into a smile. "You spoil me." "That's the plan." He slid out of bed, pulling on sweatpants and a t-shirt, moving toward the kitchen. Their penthouse was all clean lines and natural light, minimalist but warm. The kind of space that felt like sanctuary rather than showpiece. Riley wrapped herself in a silk robe and padded to the ensuite bathroom. The marble was cool under her bare feet. She studied her reflection in the mirror, hair tousled, face bare of makeup, lines beginning to form at the corners of her eyes from 32 years of living. She looked happy. It still surprised her sometimes. After Shane, she'd convinced herself that happiness was something other people experienced. People who'd never been told they were too small, too needy, too much of an inconvenience for someone's grand ambitions. But Daniel had taught her a different vocabulary. In his eyes, she wasn't too anything. She was exactly enough, and in his presence she'd learned to believe it herself. When she emerged, Daniel was in the kitchen, the espresso machine humming. He'd made her favorite, a cappuccino with the foam forming a perfect heart. He slid it across the marble counter with a croissant he'd somehow procured, probably from the French bakery on the corner that opened at dawn. "You're ridiculous," Riley said, grinning. "You deserve ridiculous." Daniel sipped his own coffee, black always, and watched her with the contentment of someone who'd found exactly what he'd been searching for. They ate in comfortable silence, the city waking up beyond their windows. Manhattan stretched below them, millions of people beginning their days, carrying their own stories of heartbreak and healing, ambition and compromise, loss and second chances. Riley's phone buzzed. A text from Catherine at the foundation saw the board agenda. "Whatever happens today, the work continues. We've got your back." She showed Daniel, who nodded. "Your team loves you. They love the mission. I'm just the vehicle." "You're more than that." Daniel set down his cup, coming around the counter to stand behind her, his arms encircling her waist. "You built something that changes lives, Riley, including your own." She leaned back into him, letting his steadiness anchor her. "I was thinking about Shane yesterday, about how much I've changed since that night in the restaurant. And I realized I'm grateful, not for what he did. That was cruel. But for what it forced me to become." Riley turned in Daniel's arms, looking up at him. "I had to rebuild myself from scratch, had to learn what I actually wanted instead of just accommodating someone else's vision, had to discover that I was never too small. I was just with someone too self-absorbed to see me." Daniel's expression was tender, proud. "So you found yourself. I was just lucky enough to meet you after you'd done the hard work. You did more than meet me. You saw me. Actually saw me." Riley's voice caught slightly. "Do you know how rare that is? To be with someone who doesn't need you to be smaller so they can feel bigger?" You make me better, Daniel said simply. That's what love is supposed to do, not diminish people, expand them. They stood in their kitchen, wrapped in each other and morning light, while the city hummed with activity below. This was what Riley had been searching for without knowing it. Not rescue, not validation, but partnership. The kind where both people brought their whole selves and found that together they created something more. Daniel's phone alarm chimed. We should get ready. Board meeting in 2 hours. Riley nodded, but didn't move immediately. Whatever Shane says today, whatever the board decides, I want you to know I'm okay, we're okay. I know. Daniel kissed the top of her head, because you're not the woman Shane left anymore, and he's not the man who could hurt you. Who am I now? Riley asked, partly curious, partly testing her own answer. Daniel pulled back slightly, meeting her eyes with the full weight of his certainty. You're the woman who turned pain into purpose, who refused to let cruelty make you cruel, who built something beautiful out of broken pieces. He cupped her face gently. You're the woman I wake up grateful for every single morning. You're Riley Whitmore, and that's more than enough. She kissed him, grateful, grounded, whole. An hour later, dressed in a charcoal pantsuit with her hair swept into a professional twist, Riley stood beside Daniel in their private elevator, descending toward the boardroom. Her wedding ring caught the light, simple platinum, heavy with meaning. Ready? Daniel asked, taking her hand. Ready. The elevator doors opened to reveal the executive floor, polished, powerful, purposeful. Riley stepped out first, Daniel at her side, and walked toward the boardroom where Shane would be waiting to face the consequences of his choices. But Riley wasn't walking toward that meeting as a victim or even as someone seeking justice. She was walking toward it as someone who'd learned the most important lesson of all, that the person who defines your worth is you, no one else, ever. And in that knowledge, she was finally, completely free. The boardroom on the 38th floor was built for intimidation. A long obsidian table that could seat 20, leather chairs that cost more than some people's cars, and walls of glass that made everyone visible from the hallway. Shane had been in this room exactly once before during his final interview. Then he'd felt invincible. Now, standing at the head of the table with his laptop open and his mistakes catalogued in neat rows of data, he felt stripped bare. The board members filed in at 8:55. 9 serious faces representing billions in collective wealth and decades of business experience. Riley and Daniel entered last, taking seats at the far end, together but distinct in their roles. Riley as foundation director, Daniel as CEO, both watching Shane with expressions that gave nothing away. Good morning, Shane began, his voice steadier than he felt. Thank you for making time on short notice. I'm here to present a critical issue regarding vendor oversight in the Foundation's housing project, and to take full accountability for failures under my supervision. No preamble, no softening, just honesty. He walked them through it, the Riverside contract, the systematic overcharges, the $87,000 discrepancy. He showed the invoices he'd approved without proper verification, the red flags he'd missed, the personal relationship that had clouded his judgment. I made assumptions based on familiarity rather than facts, Shane said, his eyes moving across the faces watching him. I prioritized speed over diligence, and as a result, funds intended for women in crisis were diverted to a vendor who exploited that trust. One board member, a woman in her 60s named Margaret Chen, leaned forward. What's your proposed remediation? Shane pulled up his second presentation. I've conducted a forensic audit of every vendor contract I've approved in the past 6 months. Of 23 contracts, 3 others show concerning patterns, though nothing as egregious as Riverside. I'm recommending immediate termination of all 4 vendors and implementation of a dual approval system for any contract over $10,000. That will slow down operations significantly, another board member noted. Yes, Shane agreed, but it will prevent this from happening again. Speed isn't worth the cost of integrity. He saw Riley's expression shift slightly, not quite approval but recognition. Daniel spoke for the first time. You mentioned taking accountability. What does that look like beyond process changes? This was the moment Shane had been dreading and preparing for in equal measure. I'm recommending my own suspension pending a full review of my department's practices. 60 days, unpaid. Additionally, I'm forfeiting this year's performance bonus, approximately $93,000, to be redirected to the Foundation's emergency fund to offset the Riverside losses. The room went silent. Margaret Chen's eyebrows rose. That's a significant financial penalty. It's appropriate, Shane said simply. I failed in my responsibilities. The Foundation's mission shouldn't suffer because of my negligence. Another board member, David Park, a venture capitalist known for ruthlessness, leaned back in his chair studying Shane. This is quite a turnaround from the ambitious hotshot we hired 6 months ago. What changed? Shane could have deflected, could have given some corporate answer about learning experiences and professional growth. Instead, he looked directly at Riley. I spent years believing that success meant climbing higher, earning more, accumulating titles and recognition. I measured my worth by external validation and other people's willingness to accommodate my ambitions. He paused, choosing words carefully. I hurt people in pursuit of that version of success, including someone in this room. Riley's expression remained neutral, but her fingers tightened slightly around her pen. What I'm learning, slowly, painfully, is that real success isn't about how high you climb. It's about who you become while climbing. And the man I was becoming? I didn't like him very much. Shane closed his laptop. This mistake with Riverside is inexcusable, but it's also given me a chance to make a different choice, to prioritize integrity over image, to actually earn the trust this position requires rather than just expecting it. Margaret Chen exchanged glances with David Park, then with Daniel, some silent conversation Shane couldn't read. We'll need to discuss this privately, Margaret said. Shane, please wait outside. Shane nodded, gathering his materials. As he passed Riley's chair, their eyes met for just a moment. He couldn't read her expression, couldn't tell if she believed him or if this was too little, too late. In the hallway, Shane paced. 15 minutes stretched into 30. His phone buzzed with messages from his team. How's it going? They firing you. Need backup. But he didn't respond. Finally, the boardroom door opened. Daniel emerged first, his expression unreadable. Come back in. Shane's heart hammered as he returned to his seat. The board members' faces gave nothing away. Margaret Chen spoke. We've reviewed your presentation and recommendation. The board has decided to accept your proposed 60-day suspension and bonus forfeiture. Additionally, you'll be placed under direct oversight of the Foundation's operations, specifically Riley Whitmore. Shane's eyes flicked to Riley, who maintained her professional composure. However, Margaret continued, we're not terminating your employment. Your transparency today, while not erasing the initial failure, demonstrates a level of accountability we rarely see at this level. You'll return after 60 days with probationary status. One more significant error, and you're done. Understood? Understood, Shane said, relief and humility washing over him in equal measure. Thank you. David Park leaned forward. Don't thank us yet. You'll be working directly on the housing project for the next 6 months after your return. Ground level. Actually meeting the women whose lives depend on this work being done right. Consider it your real education. Shane nodded. I appreciate the opportunity. The meeting adjourned. Board members filed out, some offering curt nods, others ignoring him entirely. Soon, only Shane, Riley, and Daniel remained. Daniel stood buttoning his suit jacket. I'll give you two a moment. He touched Riley's shoulder briefly, a gesture of support, not control, and left. The silence stretched between them, heavy with years of history and hurt and hard-won growth. Thank you, Shane said finally, for not pushing for termination, for giving me a chance to make this right. Riley stood, gathering her tablet and portfolio. I didn't do it for you, Shane. I did it because I believe people can change if they're willing to do the actual work. But belief isn't trust. You'll have to earn that. I know. She walked toward the door, then paused. The women you'll meet when you come back? They're all people who've been dismissed, underestimated, told they were too something or not enough something. Listen to them. Actually listen. Because they'll teach you more about success than any business school ever could. Riley? Shane's voice caught. I know I've said this before, but I need you to know. I'm not apologizing to save my job or impress the board. I'm apologizing because I finally understand what I did to you, and I'm sorry doesn't even come close to being enough. Riley looked at him for a long moment, her expression softening just slightly. You're right. Sorry isn't enough. But showing up differently, consistently, over time, that might be. She left then, her heels clicking against marble, leaving Shane alone in the glass-walled boardroom with his reflection and his reckoning. 3 floors above, Riley found Daniel waiting in their shared office. He looked up from his laptop, reading her expression. How are you feeling? He asked, standing to meet her. Riley walked into his arms, letting herself be held. Lighter, like I just set down something I've been carrying for too long. Daniel kissed the top of her head. You gave him grace, that's who you are. Not grace exactly, more like hope that people can grow. Riley pulled back to look at him. He's not the same man who hurt me, and I'm not the woman he hurt. We're both different now. Still, Daniel's hand came up to cup her face. You didn't have to advocate for keeping him. No one would have blamed you for wanting him gone. Riley smiled, reaching up to cover his hand with hers. Revenge isn't healing, and I don't need him punished to prove I'm okay. Her thumb traced across his knuckles, feeling the solid reality of his presence. I have you. I have work that matters. I have a life I've built on purpose instead of by default. That's victory enough. Daniel's eyes held that look, the one that still made her breath catch. Pride, love, wonder that somehow they'd found each other. Have I mentioned lately that I'm completely in awe of you? Not since this morning, Riley teased, but her voice was soft with emotion. He kissed her, tender, deep, a promise renewed. When they broke apart, the city sprawled below them through floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan in late morning, alive with possibility and second chances, and the million small choices that determined who people became. What do you want to do tonight? Daniel asked, his arms still around her waist. Something simple. Thai food from that place in the village, our couch, maybe that documentary you've been wanting to watch. Perfect, he smiled, that rare, unguarded expression he only showed her. Just us. Just us, Riley echoed, and in that moment, standing in a glass tower above Manhattan, held by a man who taught her what partnership actually looked like, having just extended grace to someone who'd once made her feel worthless, Riley understood something profound. Winning wasn't about revenge or vindication. Winning was building a life so full of love and purpose and authentic connection that the people who'd hurt you became footnotes in a story that had always been bigger than their cruelty. Shane would return in 60 days, maybe changed, maybe not. But it didn't matter anymore, because Riley had already moved forward, not past the pain, but through it, and had found something on the other side that no one could take away. Herself, whole, healed, home. Riley's story wasn't about revenge, it was about resurrection. 2 years ago, she walked out of a restaurant carrying the weight of someone else's cruelty, believing she was too small to matter. But pain, when transformed with intention, becomes the foundation for something unbreakable. She didn't need Shane to fall so she could rise. She rose because she chose herself when no one else would. And Daniel? He didn't rescue her. He recognized her. He saw what Shane had been too blind to notice. That strength isn't measured by how loudly you demand space, but by how gracefully you reclaim it. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't proving someone wrong. It's becoming so fully yourself that their opinion no longer defines your worth. Riley learned that love isn't about making yourself smaller to fit someone's world. It's about finding someone whose world expands to hold all of you. How many of us are still carrying words someone spoke in a moment of carelessness, letting them shape how we see ourselves? If this story moved you, subscribe to hear more like it, leave a like, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I love connecting with you.